All right, Mr. Pryor, before we go on inquiry, I believe this is an expert witness, so likewise, or likely not subject to the exclusionary rules that you're understanding.
It is, Judge.
Okay, you may inquire then. Thank you, Mr. Pryor.
Good morning, Dr. Raven. Would you please state your name, spell your last name for the record?
Catherine Raven, Raven.
And can you tell me what your occupation is?
I am a forensic pathologist.
Okay, explain to me what a forensic pathologist is.
I'm a medical doctor. I actually did 4 years of medical school. Then I became a pathologist, which is the doctor that's at the hospital, does all the lab tests, biopsies. But I specialized even further in that. I went into forensic pathology, and that's applying the knowledge of medicine as a doctor. And really the main focus is to determine cause of death in individuals.
Okay. And in what state do you practice?
Primarily in California.
And do you have any cities or municipalities that you associate with that you do work primarily for?
Yes, I'm a contract forensic pathologist in California, and I primarily work in Alameda County, which is the Bay Area, and also in Butte County.
Okay. And how long have you been a licensed forensic pathologist?
25, 26 years now.
And you're presently, obviously you testified, you're presently engaged in that profession at the present time. Is that right?
That's correct.
And where did you receive your training in pathology?
In pathology, I received it in Colorado, Denver, Colorado, at the University of Colorado Health Science Center. It was 4 years of general pathology.
And what sort of certifications or what sort of certifications are required in order to be a pathologist?
Well, to be a general pathologist, you can either be an anatomical pathologist or a clinical pathologist. So after you do a residency, you would take a board examination. I'm certified in both anatomical and clinical pathology. I also did a year of neuropathology, the studying of the nervous system, injury to the nervous system. And then I did a year of forensic pathology, which is where I do subspecialize and just did forensic pathology. I am also board certified in forensic pathology.
And you jumped the gun on me. And when we say that there is a, is that the American Board of Pathology?
Yes.
And what is the American Board of Pathology?
It's just a board, it's national. Every pathologist who's board certified takes the exact same test, regardless of where they did their training at. To be a board certified pathologist, you'd have to pass the examination.
And I assume then that you passed that examination.
Yes.
Are you, and do you have any publications or any theses that you've written as part of your 25-year career?
As a fellow, when I was in training, I had a paper published, but other than that, I've been a practicing pathologist.
So you do the hands-on work of a pathologist.
Correct.
You're not a academic person.
That's correct.
Okay. Have you testified previously in any proceedings?
Yes.
Have you previously been approved as an expert in the field of forensic pathology?
Yes.
And can you give me approximately how many times you've done that?
Probably close to 300 or more.
Okay. Now, I skipped one question. Is part of your certification, is that a national certification?
Yes. It's a board certification, so it's a national test. Yes.
Okay. So in other words, you can apply your principles of forensic pathology anywhere in the United States. It's a scientific process. Would that be fair?
Yes. As far as the pathology itself, you have to be licensed in a particular state to practice in that state. But as a pathologist, I could go anywhere and be a pathologist.
Now, in this particular case, you were retained by my office to conduct an investigation regarding this case. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the area of investigation you were to conduct was in what area of this case?
If I'm understanding the question, I was asked to review the autopsy report and other pertinent materials.
Okay. And when you did review the autopsy report?
Correct.
And do you have a recollection of all of the other documents that you reviewed?
A summary of them, but I don't know them specifically without my report.
Would it help you if I were to provide you your report?
Yes.
Okay. Oh. And Judge, at this time, I'm going to move for admission of defense exhibit, I think it's 135.
As a statement, I'm going to review that.
Yes, Your Honor, no objection.
Very well. Defense Exhibit 135 is admitted. Can you, and that's the
Okay.
report, Mr. Pryor, paper copy.
That is a paper copy, and I have a paper copy as well. And Dr. Raven, if you would be so kind as to just review, we can't have you read off, unfortunately, what you um, line by line. So if you're able to review and give us a synopsis of what you looked at after you've reviewed it, set it down, and then we'll proceed from that.
I could give a general.
Okay, go ahead. What documents did you review as part of this?
Dr. Christensen's autopsy report from Utah. Along with that were autopsy photographs. There were also some scene photographs that I reviewed. The death certificate, the original death certificate, I reviewed. There was a couple reports from the coroner. I don't know if they were the official reports, but some typewritten reports from the coroner, and some law enforcement investigation reports also.
Okay. And then in addition, in a previous matter, and I don't want to say what matter, in a previous matter, you looked and reviewed previous testimony as well,
I
correct?
reviewed previous testimony from Dr. Christensen, correct?
Okay. And you also looked at some of Dr. Marsden's remarks as well?
I don't recall her remarks as much as Dr. Christensen's.
Okay. Now, I want to go in the area of conclusions that are drawn as the result of an autopsy. And I understand there are approximately 5 categories that you can arrive at as a result of conclusions that you make when you're conducting an autopsy. Is that fair?
I'm not sure I'm following the question.
Okay. In this particular case, you arrived at a conclusion in terms of your review of the case. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that conclusion, there are other conclusions that someone in your field as a forensic pathologist can arrive at. Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair.
And what would some of those other conclusions be?
In this particular case?
Well, in any
you mean, or-
case, in general,
You mean as far as manner of death?
in
Like-
terms of manner.
In manner, so manner of death, there's usually 5 categories of manner. The cause of death is the medical disease process or injury that actually caused the death, but the manner of death is how we categorize the death, really just for death certificate purposes. So either homicide, suicide, accident, undetermined, or natural death. So any one of those 5 for manner of death can be would fit a certain case. If we don't know or it doesn't fit particularly in one or the other, then we would call it undetermined.
Now, in reviewing this case, you made some summary of some of the materials in terms of what you discovered. Can you talk briefly about the summary of some of the things you arrived at as part of your review?
Well, specifically, I paid most attention to the autopsy report. It was an autopsy after embalming and a disinterment. It was a thorough autopsy. I reviewed that. There was a few injuries, some bruising, which are very nonspecific to the arms.
And if we could stop there in a
Yeah.
minute and just talk briefly about what is nonspecific bruising?
So nonspecific bruising just means there's not a pattern to it, and anything can cause a bruise or a contusion. Is the same thing. It's caused by blunt force. So any blunt object, blunt surface, anything, you bump your arm, you fall, someone hits you, anything blunt, to compare it to a knife, should be sharp. So anything blunt can cause a bruise. So nonspecific just means we don't know what caused them. Any number of things could cause them as long as it had a blunt surface.
Okay. And at this point, when you say nonspecific, there's no way to determine what was the cause of action that resulted in the bruises on the right arm and then the one bruise on the left arm. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then you continued with your summary. I'll allow you to continue on that with what you also summarized.
Then, and there was no anatomical cause of death found at the autopsy.
Okay. And I'm gonna keep interrupting you as we go through that because this is important. When you say there was no anatomical cause of death, what does that mean?
When we do an autopsy, we look at every organ in the body. We pull it out, we dissect it, and we're looking for anything that may have caused death. So we do a dissection of the heart, looking for heart disease. We look at the lungs, the liver, every organ, the brain, looking for natural death, anything that may have caused death. In this particular case, nothing was found.
Okay. And then further, what other findings did you make?
And then the next step we would do is what's called toxicology, looking at the blood. Sometimes we look at the urine and also the fluid in the eye called vitreous. We analyze those and we look for any kind of drugs, toxins, or any abnormalities with those.
And would you agree that the toxicology report, at least according to your report that you provided, indicates that it was an extensive toxicology report?
Yes, it was a very extensive toxicology examination. They did extensive testing.
Okay. And at this point, there is always the possibility something could have been missed in the toxicology, correct?
Correct. So we just can't send a blood sample to the lab and say, look for anything and everything. We have to tell them what to look for. So most of the things we have are in a panel. We're really looking for, again, illicit drugs. If you're looking for things specifically like poisons and other things, you have to tell them which one to look for. They just don't they can't just randomly look for it. But they did extensive testing looking for several poisons and drugs.
So at this point, aside from the extensive testing, unless it was something unusual, the likelihood is that this wasn't the result of any kind of a poisoning, correct?
More than likely, it would be funny they couldn't detect anything. And there's always things we're not going to be able to detect, and the embalming does interfere with some testing, but nothing that they tested for was positive, so it would be unlikely.
Okay. And then additional findings that you made?
I have to think for a moment, sorry.
You need to refresh your report with your.
No, I just didn't know where I left off. I'm sorry. When you asked that last question. So we had the bruises that we talked about, and really that was it. There's no other anatomical cause of death from an anatomy perspective, from what the organs, and then there was no toxicological cause of death either.
Okay. Now you indicated that the body was exhumed and they performed an autopsy, and then the same day the body was reburied. Is that correct?
I don't know when it was reburied. I'm sorry.
Okay. But the autopsy was done as the same day that it was exhumed, correct?
Again, I'm not sure. I know the autopsy was done on the 19th, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure when it was exhumed, to be honest.
So the date of the autopsy was October 19th of 2019.
I believe it was December. I'm sorry, it was December 11th. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, you're right
Yeah,
too.
I'm
Oh, my
sorry,
goodness,
too.
where'd I
Yeah.
get that from? I know where I got that from.
Right, the date of the incident was
Date of her.
October 19th, but
Date of her
the,
passing was, and I apologize for that.
well, I misspoke too. So it was December 11th, 2019.
Okay. Now, the autopsy was done on December 11th of 2019. Do you recall when the date of the signature that was placed on the autopsy was placed on that document?
I believe it was in January. I can't remember the specific date of 2021.
So am I understanding that it would have been over a year plus between the time of the autopsy and the signing of the report?
It would probably be close to over 2 years.
Okay. And is there some explanation that you can logical explanation as to why there is such a gap in time between when the autopsy was done and when these folks decided to sign the document with their findings?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Overruled.
Do you have any idea how
No.
such a length of time?
Sometimes the toxicology testing takes a while, a few months. So if you get it back and it's negative, and you might go back and say, let's try this again. Let's try this. Let's look for this and let's look for that. That's the only thing I can think of why it would take so long to sign out a report.
Okay, and that could be the explanation, is that it took them a significant amount of time to try to find something in the toxicology that would support their theory?
Or other things, yes.
Okay. Okay. Now, you came to a conclusion in your report in regards to this case, is that correct?
Yes.
And what was that conclusion?
My conclusion was that since there was no anatomical or toxicological cause of death, no injury to account for death, that it would be best classified as a cause of death as undetermined.
Okay, now when you say no physical cause of death, you did review Dr. Christensen's testimony, is that correct?
Correct.
And there was some mention, at least during this trial, of the bruising on the arms. Is it your conclusion that those bruises could not be taken in consideration to support a different conclusion of asphyxia?
Well, again, the bruising on the arm is nonspecific. They're just bruises on the arm. They don't indicate a cause of death. They don't cause death in and of themselves. They're just nonspecific bruises on the arm. So I don't believe it supports a diagnosis of anything other than there was some blunt injury to the arms.
Okay. And in regards to the suggestion that if someone were to sit on the chest of someone to try to cause asphyxiation, did you examine or look into that possibility?
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's testifying misstates the prior testimony.
Sustained.
Would it be a possible basis of asphyxiation by suffocation by sitting on someone's chest?
It's a difficult question. It's very difficult to sit on somebody's chest and kill them. There are reports. There was one scientific study done back in 2017. I believe it was out of San Diego, where they actually tried to figure out how much weight it would take, how much pressure it would take to do that. Usually when somebody does asphyxiate, it's usually several people on top of somebody, or in a crowd. You've heard of the stadiums where the crowds get stuck and everyone gets pushed together. That's several bodies. It's not just one. This particular study said it would be probably 450 plus pounds that would have to require to sit. So I think it'd be extraordinarily hard to sit on somebody, a healthy young person anyways. Maybe an old febrile person you might be able to, but I think it'd be very, very difficult and unlikely.
Okay. And then the possibility of asphyxiating them by just holding their arms, that's not going to do it either, correct? Just hold.
Objection, Your Honor. This misstates prior testimony. Move to strike.
Overruled.
Would just holding somebody's arms and leaving bruises, is there a way to asphyxiate someone that way?
No, so asphyxia just really means that there's no oxygen getting to the blood to supply our organs. So several things can cause asphyxia. Asphyxia is just a mechanism. It's not really even a cause of death. It's always due to something. So it might be asphyxia due to drowning, where we're not getting oxygen, asphyxia due to choking, asphyxia due to strangulation. So asphyxia in itself just means that they're not getting oxygen. That's a very nonspecific term.
Did you see any indication that there was any damage to the neck or the throat?
No, there was no obvious damage to the neck. There was some damage caused by the embalming process. May have obscured, at least on the right side of the neck, but there was no obvious hemorrhage or other injury.
Now, in reading Dr. Christensen, Dr. Marsden's reports, they established that this was homicide by asphyxia. And can you explain why you differ with that diagnosis?
Well, it's a person we have no cause of death for. We don't know what the cause of death is. So that would be undetermined. It's an undetermined death. It happens. Probably 5 to 10% of autopsies may be undetermined. Some reports say lower. So it's not, if we just don't find anything, there's several things can cause death without leaving any signs or indications. So since we don't know exactly what happened, we call it undetermined, and that's what I would have called this.
And some of the other possibilities other than asphyxia would include what?
As far as not leaving any signs or not having anything, a seizure can cause a death without leaving any signs. A cardiac arrhythmia can also cause death without leaving any signs. Asphyxia is one thing that can cause it. Drugs that weren't detected.
Okay. Now, in this particular case, you made note of some of the comments that were made about Tammy's past medical issues, some shaking and some lightheadedness, those sort of things. Is that something that would be consistent with a seizure diagnosis?
Well, it might be consistent with a seizure, the shaking fits that were described. Since there was no diagnosis, that's hard to say. The only way to diagnose it would have been to go to a neurologist and have it diagnosed. But certainly that's the history that we get. Some people see shaking. Sometimes it's violent. Sometimes it's even just violent. I'm sorry. Sometimes people just stare off into space. There's different kinds of seizures. So a shaking fit would be described by a layperson.
And you did touch on that, and that was the next area, is that seizures don't necessarily mean that there's episodes of violent shaking. Is that correct?
That is correct.
We've seen some of the politicians in the past several years who have just been on live camera and they just black out and there's nothing there. Those are what you.
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's testifying. Move to strike.
Sustained. And I'll strike that last question.
So a seizure, can you describe a little bit about the types of seizures for me?
Again, you can have different types of seizures. You have larger seizures what we think of larger seizures, where you think of that most people think of the shaking, the convulsing. It could be very traumatic. Actually, you can get a lot of injuries from those, serious injuries also. Or you could have smaller ones, lighter ones where sometimes people just might stare off into space. Sometimes they do like just repetitive type of motions with their hands or even their lips smacking. Very, very small, can be very subtle. It really depends where the focus is at and what type of seizure it is.
But whether it's a small seizure or a large seizure, ultimately at some point that seizure could become fatal. Is that correct?
Yes, seizures are a cause of death. We see them as a cause of death or attribute it to death, not infrequently.
Okay, you also mentioned arrhythmia. Talk to me a little bit about arrhythmia.
Well, again, these are just the things that people die from that we can't see anything. An arrhythmia is an electrical disturbance, just like a seizure is an electrical disturbance in the brain. An arrhythmia is an electrical disturbance in the heart. So same thing, we may not see anything at the time of death or at the autopsy, excuse me.
Okay. And at some point with arrhythmia, with arrhythmia, there's not necessarily any signs of damage with the heart. Is that correct?
Correct. Frequently you'll see cardiac abnormalities. You might see a structural defect in the heart, some coronary artery disease. You might see something. And then if it's a sudden death, it's a presumed cardiac arrhythmia. You don't have to have a structural defect, but we do usually see that.
Okay. Now, in this particular case, Dr. Christensen came to the conclusion that this was homicide, and your conclusion is different, obviously. Is that correct?
Correct.
And as far as the explanations of the possibilities of what potentially could have caused the death without any physical signs of any structural or physical damage, what would those include?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The causes of death that could have resulted from this. They could include a seizure, is that correct?
Yes.
They could include arrhythmia, is that correct?
Yes.
They could include asphyxia, is that correct?
Yes.
Is there really any certainty to know what was the cause of death of Tammy Daybell?
No, because all those, plus again, if there's some toxicology that we didn't pick up on, can cause death without leaving any signs.
Now, is it standard practice when there's no signs and there's no indication of what could have caused the death to take a jump to asphyxia? Is that what would be the common practice?
In my opinion, no. The way I practice and the way I've always taught people to practice in the institutions I've been associated with, again, we would call them undetermined. It's not, we do get cases where we don't find anything. We don't jump to conclusions or speculate. We just say these are things that might have happened. We don't know, so we're better left calling it undetermined. Other people might practice differently.
Okay. So it's a matter of how people practice. Would that be fair?
I think that's fair.
But in your opinion, there's no conclusion that could be drawn in this particular case.
No, there was no scientific evidence of a cause of death.
I want to talk to you about a little bit of a term in terms of your profession. The term is called confirmatory bias. Are you familiar with that term?
Vaguely familiar. A confirmation bias is what I think I know it as.
Okay, and explain to me what that means.
It's kind of a term that's been introduced over the last couple of years. Actually, it's probably been around longer than that, but in forensic pathology, just the last few years. Anyways, it just talks about, if you have something in your mind or you're told a scenario in a case, if you're not going to just see that and make and lean your diagnoses towards that. For example, if there was a baby and somebody told you, someone saw the parent squeezing the baby, you might lean towards asphyxia because you're being biased by that history. So it's kind of a bias. It's not just looking at the scientific evidence in front of you, but you're being biased by other things.
So if someone were to say that they put the procedural history and some of the events that occurred around the time of Tammy Daybell's death, that would be an example of confirmatory bias. Would that be fair?
Possibly, depends what was told them, possibly,
Okay.
yes.
Well, you talked about the fact that someone saw the baby squeezed or shaken, and then the investigation is turned that way and leaned that way, correct?
Yes, that's what it's most commonly seen in, is like a shaken baby case.
So if someone has provided some information, regardless of whether it's relevant to the case, we should still be going back to the scientific evidence and base it on science and facts. Would that be fair?
Yes, as a physician, pathologist, our diagnosis should be based off science and what we can actually see, rather than speculating. Again, that's how I've always practiced, and that's how I teach.
And would it be fair to say that most of you folks in the field of forensic pathology would approach it the way you're approaching it?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Sustained.
I have nothing else, Judge. Thank you.
Ms. Blake, I presume, doing the cross, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Raven.
Good morning.
You indicated that you are a forensic pathologist. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you work as a medical examiner?
I do not now.
So in your current capacity, you're not in a medical examiner, your office? In your current capacity, you're not working at a medical examiner's office?
No, I'm a forensic pathologist, an independent contractor at this point in my career.
Do you have investigators that work with you?
Yes, in the coroner's office, we'll still have investigators.
So you are in a coroner office system right now?
Yes.
In the current system you're in, who determines whether or not an autopsy should be conducted?
It really varies. Most of the time, it's the pathologist who determines that. It really depends. And a medical examiner, it's different because the pathologist is the medical examiner. A coroner system, it's a little different. It's the coroner who will bring the case in. Usually it's left up to the pathologist in my jurisdictions to determine the level of the examination.
And we've talked a little bit about your report. And do you still have that with you?
I do not.
May the witness be handed that last exhibit?
Yes.
Thank you.
And I believe you indicated that you reviewed the autopsy report and documents that were specific. See if I can find the phrasing here. That you reviewed the autopsy report and other pertinent information. Do you recall that?
Yes, I listed a few things, yes.
And in your report, there's a section, materials reviewed. Do you see that section?
Yes.
Is that an exhaustive list of the documents you reviewed in this case?
The initial, I believe I've had a few documents sent to me since this report. But I believe that would have been, it, yes.
And do you mind reading those off for the record, what you reviewed?
Absolutely. I thought I wasn't supposed to, but I can.
Yes, it's an exhibit that's been admitted, so I think that's appropriate.
So I could just verbatim.
Yes, if you wouldn't mind doing that.
You have to excuse my voice, I'm sorry. The following materials were reviewed regarding the death of T. Daybell. Autopsy report authored by Dr. Lily Marston, co-signed by Dr. Eric Christensen. Autopsy photographs, toxicology reports from NMS and the Utah Department of Health. A brief investigative report from the Office of the Medical Examiner, State of Utah. A typed coroner report, not signed, dated, or on letterhead, unknown time, authored, or source. The Fremont County Coroner informal record of death report. A report by Deputy Greenhall, excuse the name, Detective Fabinich and Lieutenant Powell. Scene photographs, unknown source. Report by B. Mattingly. Fremont County incident report from incident from 10/09/2019. Copy of the death certificate for T. Daybell, signed 10/19/2019 by Brenda Dye, and the transcript of Dr. Christensen's testimony, Brenda Dye interview, and Deputy Coroner M. Wilmore's interview.
And you said maybe since then you've reviewed a few more documents?
Yes, I believe so, but that was 3 years ago, so I believe a few things have come through. When I started first reviewing them, a few things have come through since.
And do you recall what those things are that have come through?
I believe it was just, I believe it was different reports of what the coroner reported on. I don't recall specifically, I'm sorry.
As part of your, and let me back up, and these were documents that were provided to you by defense counsel?
That's correct.
So when you say you reviewed the autopsy report and other pertinent information, it was the defense that provided you that other pertinent information, is that correct?
The defense provided me everything, yes.
Did you review a report from Lieutenant Powell regarding requesting Walmart records?
That does not sound familiar, but I don't remember.
Did you review a report of an interview with Emily Daybell?
I don't recall.
Did you review a report of an interview with Paul Daybell?
I don't recall.
Did you review a report of an interview with Jana Penrose, a relative of Tammy Daybell?
I don't believe so.
Did you review a report of an interview with David Warwick?
I don't believe so. The name's not familiar.
And you said you reviewed some of the coroner reports. Would that be Brenda Dye? Does that name sound familiar?
It does sound familiar. Like I said, one was not signed. I didn't know who wrote it, but that name does sound familiar.
Did you review an interview that was conducted with Brenda Dye, a report of that?
I believe so, yes.
Did you review a report of an interview conducted with the deputy coroner, Tammy Wilmore?
Yes, I believe so.
Did you review a report that contained some records from a Lolly Time iCloud account?
No.
Did you review a report from Benjamin Dean, an analyst with the FBI?
No.
Did you review the Seasons medical records?
No.
Did you review the Teton medical records?
No.
And I think you indicated you did review some reports of the October 9th incident,
Yes.
and that would have been regarding an attempted shooting of Tammy Daybell. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Did you review a report of an interview with Matthew and Regan Price?
I don't believe so.
Did you review a report of an interview with Haley Palmer?
No.
Did you review any reports of interviews with Angela Yancey?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Ronald and Phyllis Douglas?
Judge, I'm going to object at this point to the relevance of how that would have an impact on the autopsy. She's going to go down a list of every report that any witness in this case
Mr. Pryor,
discussed.
no speaking objections, please, but I'll sustain the objection at this point unless there's some specific relevance to the autopsy.
And if I may respond?
Go ahead.
I'm reading off a list that was reviewed by the Utah medical examiners in making their findings. I
Okay,
think it is relevant.
all right. If that's the foundation for that, I'll allow that to continue. Thank you, Ms. Blake.
Did you review a report of an interview with Ronald and Phyllis Douglas?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Lisa Jensen?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Janet Davis?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Melissa Coles?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Mary Fran Jepson?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Faye Harris?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with John Ox?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Margaret Brown?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Stephanie Peralta?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Angela Johansson?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Shanna Miller?
I don't recall.
Did you review a report of an interview with Barbara Blair?
I don't believe so.
Did you review a report of an interview with Hannah Munoz?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Britt and Crystal Briggs?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Micaiah Baglin?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Cara and Sandra Briggs?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Emma Moss?
No.
Did you review a statement given by Greg Stoddard?
I don't recall.
Did you review 4 to 5 reports regarding insurance surrounding Tammy Daybell life insurance?
No.
Did you review a report indicating Tammy never used any sick days?
No.
Did you review her Walmart prescription records?
No.
Did you review a report regarding Tammy's cell phone?
No.
Did you review a report? Actually, I'll back up there. So as part of your review of the findings in the autopsy, you did not review the list that was just read off.
No.
Were those documents provided to you?
No.
Some of those that were indicated was the medical records. Did you specifically review the season's medical records associated with Tammy Daybell
As answered before, I did not.
and the Teton medical records?
Judge Aston answered.
Abstain.
Counsel asked you about reviewing or looking at medical records referencing shaking fits and seizure activity. Did you ever look at any medical records referencing shaking fits?
I don't recall the first question, and I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. I'm sorry. Can you rephrase that?
Did you ever review any medical records associated with Tammy Daybell that referenced shaking fits?
No, I did not.
Did you ever review any medical records associated with Tammy Daybell that referenced seizure activity?
I did not.
Where did that information come from?
That information came from the coroner's report.
And the coroner's report was information obtained from Chad Daybell?
I believe that's where she got it from, but you'd have to ask her. I'm not sure where they got their medical information from.
And you talked about a possible cause of death being cardiac arrhythmia.
It's one possible cause when there's no anatomical findings, yes.
And you said generally with that, you would find a structural defect.
And commonly we do, yes.
In the review of the autopsy report, was there any structural defect with Tammy Daybell's heart?
Not that they found, no.
You were also asked about the bruising on Tammy Daybell, and I think you said you defined it as unspecified or unspecific bruising?
Non-specific. Dr. Christensen testified to that too. They're non-specific bruises.
And counsel proceeded to ask you about putting pressure on someone's chest. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you indicated you would expect it to be 2 people, at least if that was done?
No, it just takes significant weight to do that. I mean, it's hard to sit on somebody to cause death, and the scientific literature that's out there says probably 450 pounds or more. Actually, it was closer to 600, but they went down to 450.
But you would agree that it could be more than one person involved
Possibly.
if that were to happen?
If you have more than one person on you, yes.
And what are the other ways that asphyxiation can be caused or occur?
Well, again, asphyxia is just the process of the body not getting oxygen. So many things. We said drowning already, you're underwater, you're not getting oxygen, choking, you have airway obstruction, suffocation. You can be in a position like a car. People have asphyxia where they're underneath a car and the car collapses on them. Where the pressure on the chest. Asphyxia could be from chemical asphyxia, such things like cyanide can cause an asphyxial death because it blocks the oxygen getting to the tissues. So the list can go on and on.
And one way to cause asphyxiation could be to place a pillow over someone's head?
You could suffocate them by putting an object or something in front of their face, if that's what you mean.
Yes.
Yes.
One way to suffocate someone could be to put a plastic bag over their head. Would that cause asphyxiation?
Yes.
And as a forensic pathologist, would you agree that you approach an autopsy more like a doctor as you're looking for symptoms, causes?
Well, we are a doctor, so we do look for scientific evidence of a diagnosis. Again, we don't speculate on diagnoses. We say this is a gunshot wound because we have evidence of the gunshot wound. We have hemorrhage, we have a knife wound. So again, yes, we use scientific evidence to base our diagnoses off of like any doctor does.
And the difference being in an autopsy, your patient can't provide that information, correct?
That's correct.
So you would have to get it from collateral sources?
Pertinent to the cause of death, yes.
If I may have just a moment.
You may.
I have no further questions.
All right. Redirect Mr. Pryor.
Dr. Raven, Ms. Blake went over a litany of other reports and statements from other witnesses, a variety of other documents. When a forensic pathologist is examining a variety of other documents that are not related to the medical reports and the scientific evidence, is that an example of confirmation bias?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Overruled.
Is that an example of confirmation bias when you take into account all of these other reports, documents, statements of people who are not present at the murder?
So, and it's a difficult question. We don't honestly look at all those reports on any case really I've ever heard of such an exhaustive list because we don't have those reports available to us. Maybe over a 2-year period we would have them. I don't know. But we don't. Again, we always base it off scientific evidence, what we have in front of us, the autopsy. Either we have a cause of death or we don't. We try not to speculate. We try not to guess on what a cause of death is. There's lots of implications to that for anybody. So generally speaking, it is bias. If that's what you're using to determine a cause of death for, that's bias. Either you have a cause of death or you don't. And then again, if we had a case like this where we don't have a cause of death, we do just call it undetermined. And we put that list, what we've talked about today, these are potential findings, but we don't commit to one of those.
Okay. And to commit to some other information like a plastic bag or sitting on someone's chest or putting a pillow over somebody's face, would you agree that that would be conjecture, speculation, and hunch?
Without any evidence
Yeah.
of that? Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And at the present time, would it be your testimony that the logical conclusion in your mind that should be drawn from this is that the cause of death of Tammy Daybell would be undetermined.
Yes, in my opinion, it should be undetermined.
Judge, I have no other questions. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right.
And Judge, I would ask for a recross.
I don't think any door was open there, Ms. Blake, so I'll deny the request. All right, that'll conclude the testimony then of Dr. Raven. Is she going to remain under subpoena?
She is not, Judge. She's excused. And thank you, Dr. Raven.
You're welcome.
Does the state have any subpoena served on her?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes your testimony. Thank you for coming in.
You're